This is our Findhorn barrel, and I'm going to be going for a walk with Eian Smith around the Ecovillage, maybe the woods, maybe the dunes. How you doing, Eian?
I'm doing really good. It's amazing how much of a warm summer we're getting this year. The clouds look like they're going to be dumping some rain, but the forecast says it's not going to happen, and one never knows.
So I wanted to have a conversation with you because you've been involved in so many different aspects of the Ecovillage. You've been in Dunelands, you've been an NFA listener convener, you're in the education circle, you're involved in the NFA, and lots of other things. But you haven't been in the foundation, which is interesting. That's the one thing you haven't really been involved with.
I first came here to do Experience Week in October 2004, at which point I was 3 months away from becoming a dad. And by the end of my Experience Week, I had realized that this would be a really great place for a kid to grow up. My older daughter's mom and I were on Iona at the time and had thought we would stay on Iona, but we were really struggling to find somewhere to live there. And Experience Week really opened my eyes to the potential for this place as a place for someone to grow up. And of course, it turned out to be pretty good for me to grow up here too. And yeah, when I first moved to the site, I assumed I was just going to join Park Kitchen and join the foundation. But at that point in 2005, the foundation didn't have the space for taking in a whole family. It wasn't part of its kind of internal vision at the time that, one person could work and another could raise a child and they could trade off. And that has changed since then. There have been times where that's been more happening, and there was definitely times in earlier years of the place where lots of families were doing that. So I ended up starting to work for the Phoenix. I ended up spending 4 years managing the bakery, seeing it move from the park to the village. And then I had asked the then management of the Phoenix Community Stores if they would support me to pay some of my time to join the NFA Council. So I joined as an NFA counselor in 2008. And after after 9 months of that, I had some of the other NFA counselors prompting me to run for listener convener in the next year's election. And my response was, "Are you kidding? I'm brand new here. I'm not ready." And they sort of looked at me and said, "Get ready." So I did the best I could. It was a wonderful, intense process to, put myself out in the Universal Hall for an election process. There were 2 of us that were running at the time. And thankfully, the other guy, John Ragg, joined the council as a councillor anyway. So he still got involved. And at that particular time, and as I was a councillor and became listener convener, the NFA took on the general office, started publishing the Rainbow Bridge. All these things sort of started coming out of the Findhorn Foundation and moving into the new Findhorn Association.
So what did the NFA, what did it start out as?
I've never quite understood why the new Findhorn Association was chosen as a name. I'm imagining there was a whole process that happened around choosing that name, but that was before my time. What I do know is that in its initial incarnation, and there was quite, to my understanding, an engaged community process that went over the course of at least a year, included bringing some people in from outside, like Robert Gilman, who had also been one of the core architects of the Ecovillage movement. a brilliant astrophysicist who I recommend anybody look up online. So he and a bunch of community members had worked for over a year to create the Constitution and design, I guess, come up with the name and all the things to start the NFA in 1999. And it, like many things here, was built on the back of previous attempts at reconciling the evolution of the place. There was a period where the community was a group of people, and then the community centered around the Findhorn Foundation, and then the community was the Findhorn Foundation, and the Findhorn Foundation was the community. And then over time, more people would either leave the Findhorn Foundation yet want to stay, or like in my case in the 2000s, come here and not go through the Findhorn Foundation. When I became listener convener, there was almost a stark tension between, like I attended some, as counselor before becoming listener convener, I attended some pretty intense facilitated sessions between the Findhorn Foundation management team and the NFA Council. People generally have will to good. They want the best outcome for the whole place. And the confusion comes in on how we navigate that in a complex system. I think part of what we've been dealing with in the last couple of years of the Findhorn Foundation Trust winding itself down is just how much, as a whole community, we just let the Findhorn Foundation Trust do all the things.
Do you ever regret not having been able to be in the foundation? And, you know, a lot of people say it was a life-changing experience and that they experienced this feeling of community and closeness that they haven't experienced in other situations, and you were kind of always on the outside.
Yep.
Is there like this regret that now it's like the trust closed, that you lost out on that? Or
so there was definitely a period where I had some angst, some regret at not getting the opportunity to be in the organization properly.
Was it partly finances that made it difficult? Because you had to pay for programs in order to be able to be eligible for staff positions?
For sure. For me personally, that was part of the issue because, you know, I came here as a working father, and then I was a single father after 3 years, you know, and I didn't have the nest egg to invest in the sort of 3 months of LCG and whatever else was necessary to kind of get to the 2 years of co-worker threshold. Interestingly, I was just about to start LCG in September 2019 in Clooney Kitchen when one of my fellow directors for Duneland approached me with the prospect of taking on a paid role within Duneland instead. You know, who knows what would have happened in that alternate reality where I went into Clooney Kitchen instead of going into Duneland, but it gives me that comfort of knowing that all things being equal, I did have an opportunity in the end. I don't feel the regret for the Findhorn Foundation Trust closing down and I never got my chance with it. I'm more fascinated in trying to retain as much as possible the learnings from that long experience of that organization. And yeah, there's a part of me that would have assumed 10 years ago that organization would have outlived me.
Yeah.
And all things being equal, that's not going to be the case. To loop back to what you were saying about the NFA being created, for me, the name is interesting, but what was more fascinating was that in its original incarnation, it was a forum of organizations. The original NFA Constitution...
It's going to go this way because there's quite a lot of wind.
Yeah. The original NFA Constitution didn't have individual membership. if you joined the NFA, you joined through the Findhorn Foundation or through Phoenix Community Stores or through Woodhead Community. And I think I wasn't around until after it had changed, but in 2003, they changed the Constitution to bring in the ability for people to join the NFA directly. But what it did mean is that the potential for governance that was there in the forum of organizations was de-emphasized significantly. It shifted from the potential for a governance structure to more focusing on a social cultural organization. And I think it's been very important for the NFA to inhabit that social cultural piece, because that has allowed us to work on our identity. And I know there's a lot of people who would say that our identity is still not clear. But I think, especially in this day and age where we've had to completely release the identity, or we're in the process of completely releasing the identity of the Findhorn Foundation. One of the things, in my personal view, that is a positive outcome of the last 4 years of change, with the legacy Findhorn Foundation Trust winding down and the community taking on more things, was that the older Findhorn Foundation Trust had already intended to create a new education-focused SCIO. And for that SCIO, which is Scottish Charitable Incorporated Organization, the Findhorn Foundation Trust created a lean and light, because nothing had been transferred to it yet, SCIO that, in my view, was well placed to move forward in this system because it was only focused on education and wasn't also dealing with infrastructure and accommodation and all the things. And some of the trajectory was that it was going to take on more had it continued down the path that it was going on. But at the beginning of 2025, it was a very light structure, and the only things that had been moved over was a few staff, and not necessarily, the staff hadn't been moved over, the staff had been hired anew with the new organization, but the sort of intellectual property and some of the global interface had been put into the SCIO, and everything else was still waiting. And it felt to me that was exactly right. And that SCIO had focused it had started running programs again, but focused over on the West Coast, on Iona and on Air 8, on programs out there. And had said, we'll come back to the park at some point, but right now we want to focus out there. And then when some key individuals in the SCIO tendered their resignation earlier this year, the first priority was for the remaining members of the SCIO and the trustees of the SCIO to address the rest of the staff that were in it and figure out the basic logistics of what they needed to do as a company. And then the trustees, knowing that there was a group of educators and people that were interested in furthering education already meeting for over a year and a half.
Which has been called the Education Circle.
Yeah, that's the Education Circle, which came out of a process 2 years ago where the community had responded to a Moray Council call for ideas. And there'd been a number of threads that had come up out of that call for ideas, and one of them was education. And so that group, which had started out with maybe half a dozen people and 3 kind of leaders, now is, over, I think, 80 people. And so that circle had actually put a really solid amount of work into outlining the parameters of what would be useful, if not necessary, for increasing education here again. And then the SKIO came knocking and said, well, would this structure work for you? And in fact, we've got a bunch of these documents already done. And the response was, yeah, that sounds great. And the SKIO's next question was, well, okay, can we make you trustees tomorrow? And the education circle said, no. If we're going to do this as the community taking this on, we need to act as we intend to be.
We don't want to just take it on because it's not democratic.
Yeah, well, and because it's not democratic in and of itself can be a little bit of a tricky term, because it's not in keeping with the spirit of it being a community organization. Because what was wanted was a community structure to hold aspects of education.
And then, so putting that to one side, there's also EF, which was already set up as a community organization to hold education and workshops and stuff. Is that correct?
Well, depending on who you ask, Ecovillage Findhorn CBS was set up as a land trust.
Right.
It was set up, or there are definitely those that view it as having been set up to hold everything and anything. And education is part of its charitable principles.
So in a sense, it was set up as a sort of replacement for the Foundation Trust, which was a kind of everything and anything organization.
Again, I think some people hold that view.
Right.
That's certainly not my view of Ecovillage Findhorn CBS. My understanding is that it was really a big part of the genesis was to hold assets and to hold land, and to bring things into community ownership that are best held by the community on a physical level.
Right.
Which isn't to say that it can't do education is one of its charitable goals.
So things like the Universal Hall,
Yeah.
and some of the accommodation and stuff like that.
Yeah. So they currently own, I think it's about 30% of the land. Maybe it's more like high 20s, depending on how you define the boundaries and that sort of thing. You know, if you get 20 people in a room, there's probably 21 opinions on any different thing.
Yeah.
And I think that is definitely true for all the members of the NFA, all the members of Ecovillage Findhorn CBS, and everybody who sat in on the education circle. But in this particular process, the education circle genuinely tried to create a process to select new trustees for the SKIO from the community, supported by the community, using the model that had been used recently for Ecovillage Findhorn CBS. And when it was brought to the community at community meetings multiple times.
When we say, just to clarify, when you say community meetings, you mean NFA meetings?
For the most part, they were NFA meetings. Right. Yes. NFA is currently the main organization that will hold a community meeting, call a community meeting, and kind of create the container for it. But even that's been a little bit fluid for the last few months, because some of them there have been some community meetings that have been an Ecovillage Findhorn CBS meeting. And it's felt much the same as a NFA meeting, with many of the same people showing up, but that organization booked the hall and set it up and leads the processes. So yes, there were multiple NFA community meetings where the education circle presented the process going forward. And for some it felt very rushed, for others it felt very graceful, but in the end, as there was one community meeting where there was intended to be simply an update to the process. A group of people basically attempted to interrupt the update with a petition asking for everything to stop. And the petition was based on a part of the NFA Constitution that hadn't really previously been activated. And so hence the NFA peacekeepers, who are voluntary, generously stepped in and supported a 3-week process of an inquiry and evolution, I would say. A lot of people are ruggedly and doggedly individualistic, and I think that's perfect. One of my key attractions to being here is that there is no one way. There isn't one founder. There were 3 or 6 or 8, depending on where you draw the line.
And they didn't always agree with each other either.
No. And there isn't one, core message. There's 3 or more, depending on how you quantify it. I think there's a bench over there if we want to sit down for a bit. And for me, the moment when Eileen got guidance to stop giving guidance is one of the most attractive aspects of this place, because it basically reinforces for me that there is no one way. We all have the wisdom within and power to work towards a better world. No one person's or one organization's vision takes precedence.
And that's always felt like a tension. There seems to be a group of people who seem to think that everyone has to be part of one organisation. And as they keep seeing more organisations and businesses being created, the more stress they seem to get about this idea of it being, a poly organisation. Mm-hmm. And then there's other people who love the diversity. Yeah,
I think I'm definitely of the latter of those two. I love the diversity. It's absolutely essential to me. I think if everything did collapse into one organization, I'm not sure I would stick around. And maybe there'd be people who'd be happy to hear that. But we are, and also the reality is we are already multiple organizations, and I see no way of collapsing all of them. So if that's already a given, my personal preference is to embrace that and probably find better ways to communicate that. The resilience that comes from a diversity of organizations is worth the complexity. And in fact, I would even say it's why we're still having this conversation in 2025. Because had this place only been one organization, and that organization's business model failed, as the Findhorn Foundation Trust did, and I recognize that's a very personal statement with judgment and not necessarily the truth. We would be in far worse straits as a community than we are now. But the fact that multiple other organizations have either stepped in or been created to pick up the slack, for me, is an example of why the diversity of multiple organizations is valuable. Because of my choice to sit on boards of directors and look under the hood and see how the engine works means it doesn't feel complex to me. But for a lot of people, I totally get that it feels that way. Mm. And I feel that there are ways of making it more accessible to more people. And hopefully in so doing, actually getting support and engagement and input from more people. Because the number of times that I've sat in board meetings and we've been like, okay, well, we're losing another board member. Who do we know who could maybe help us out and step in? And it's rarely a long list. And we're usually kind of having to get kind of creative and asking people out of the blue and that sort of thing. Because when you just put it out in the Rainbow Bridge or in the annual reports or what have you, very rarely, if ever, does somebody step forward and say, hey, I read the annual report and it says you're looking for new directors. I'd like to put myself forward. Like it almost, having been part of the Ecopia board for as long as I have, that request goes out to the Ecopia membership every year. And I think only once in that time has somebody, based on that, hey, you're a member, would you like to join the board of directors of the Community Benefit Society? it's most of our directors have been, I had a conversation with this person. I think they would be a good fit, and let's bring them on board for a couple of meetings and see what they think. And I think if the place was communicated in a way that was more accessible to more people, I think more people might get engaged and feel the joy and the burden of actually being part of running the place.
I feel that the foundation didn't help things by presenting somewhat of a fiction, that it was the whole of the Ecovillage. It's not that anymore, and the current website doesn't have all this, but on the previous website, it kind of presented itself as almost owning all the houses and everything that was going on, when in reality it wasn't. As people came in to the park, then they suddenly discovered it. There were all these different organisations doing all this stuff that the foundation seemed to be saying it was doing. And then get really confused. Yeah. And I think some of that confusion is still there, even hanging over from previous years.
I totally agree, both for the visitors coming for the day and for people who came through Experience Week. Because, one of the things that I really enjoyed doing, while I wasn't a coworker, I did just about everything that one could do as an external community member, including doing the training to lead Experience Weeks. I probably did 250 plus group discovery games, facilitations in my time here. Loved it, every single one, just so precious. But when I did the training to lead Experience Week, and the kind of context introduction piece of the Saturday afternoon that talks about this place, I was like, this is so out of date. This isn't what the community is anymore. And unless you rewrite it to sort of say the Findhorn Foundation is a community within a larger community, why are we saying this? And I wasn't super impressed with the response I got at the time. And I knew that it was different depending on who was actually giving that spiel. But if it was somebody giving that spiel who had come to the community to do Experience Week in Clooney and had stayed on to do LCG and become a coworker and had never even lived in the park. They were we talk about polarities here, but that old polarity of the Clooneyeites and the Parkies, that was old school. And some people were diehard one or the other for a while. It was really interesting. And so somebody who had been through that journey, and then they were introducing 20 to 25 new people to the community through that lens of Findhorn is Clooney even, means that over the years, a lot of people came into the system with their first information being flawed. And, one of my favorite pieces of human development information is how real confirmation bias is. The first information that we get is very difficult to disprove. And in fact, we select the information that comes afterwards to reinforce that as opposed to question it, because questioning it is more difficult. And so I think, yes, as a whole system, we reinforced this idea that the foundation was the community and the community was the foundation for way past its sell-by date.
And yet the world thinks it's disappeared, but it's all here.
Well, and then you've got this voice that's come up in this recent process that seems to me, and again, my judgment, my perspective, but seems to me, but we want this new organization to be like the foundation was and be everything and the one-stop shop for the place. And I can understand where that comes from. There's probably multiple ways that you get to the idea that makes sense. For whatever reason, my journey tells me that doesn't make sense. And in fact, the idea of it is frightening to me. And we'll see. I think it is one of the aspects that I find fascinating about living here, being part of, whether it be just sitting in the middle row in a community meeting and saying nothing, or sitting in a board meeting where we're talking about how we're going to do X, Y, and Z, is my sense of this evolutionary center. I'm actually playing with the idea of doing something around the word Evo-Village as opposed to Ecovillage, because I think the ecological aspects of what we do here are important and very beautiful, and certainly as a founding member of the global Ecovillage network, I don't want to ever leave that term behind. But for me, the evolutionary impulse here is so fascinating and so powerful, and it's multifaceted. The social evolution is for me a key aspect of the place. I know that if I go to the cafe, part of me may want to just order a flat white and a cheese scone and eat it and be gone. But another part of me knows that I might end up being there for 2 hours because I get into a conversation with somebody about something. And even just walking up and down on the runway sometimes is like that. Yeah, it feels an exciting time to be here. And yet interesting for me in that I came here to, on the face of it, to give my then unborn child a place to grow up. And they've now gone on to, go to university, still only an hour away, but, somewhat move on, and I'm now, am I still here? Part of me wants to stay here so that I can be here because I now have another child who comes here a couple of times a year, and I want to sort of keep the place going for them, for both of them to be able to return as and when they ever want. And yet, who knows? I find it fascinating, the nuances, the relationships, and again, the huge-heartedness of everybody that I work with and interact with and play with here. From the beginning, I can remember in the first year of being here, waking up with a newborn child. If I was on a day off, I could go to 8:30 meditation. I could, have a conversation at the cafe. And in the afternoon, I could go to a puja ceremony. And then in the evening, I could go to a yoga class. Like, the privilege that we have of the amount of access to activities, perspectives, spiritual practice, and entertainment and information here is incredible, absolutely incredible. And it has really drawn some powerful and beautiful people that I love working with, and sometimes find challenging.
I think it's a good place to end there. Thank you for taking the time out. It's really interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, I love talking about this place, and I can do it for hours.